Hi everyone and welcome. I am Ruz Beshad. This is the 13th part of the series on how to develop a software application and the final part of creating a pagination component. In this video, I'll show you how the data grid component talks to the presentation layer to load data without having to directly send the data load request to the API service. I'll also show you how to send a request to the RestApi service with information about the pagination and return the relevant data to the presentation layer for loading. Please stay with me until the end of this video to note the important details that I'll explain. I'm sure you'll find it very informative and useful. So, are you ready? Let's get started. Well, expand the Northwind UI Components project. Open the grid class and go to the onPagination change method. From the previous videos, you remember that the pagination component talks to the grid by using an event callback. We connected the event callback to this method. So, when a change occurs in pagination, it notifies the grid by calling this method. Now I have a question for you. Should we write some piece of code here to get and load data? The answer is no. But why no? We don't want grid to directly communicate with the RestApi service to get data. It should only communicate with the components such as category list page in the user interface, that is the Northwind web project. It's the responsibility of the presentation layer to send a request to the service to get data. This is called separation of concerns, which is a principle of software design that code be separated into layers and components that each have distinct functionality with as little overlap as possible. So we just need to notify the presentation layer of a change. Let's begin with adding an event callback parameter as follows. Okay, go back to the onPagination change method and replace this comment with the following statement. Having this, we can easily notify the consumer component that a change has occurred in the grid and it should load data. Note that we denoted the grid info class as the type parameter in the callback. This is because we want to pass the required information stored in the grid info object to the consumer component, the category list page in this example, so that it knows how and what request to send to the RestApi to get data back. Because it's awaitable, make the method asynchronous. Now go to the category list page in the Northwind web project. First of all, I'd like to separate code from markup. In my previous video, Organize your reusable Razor components using RCL, I talked about it in detail. So if you're interested, watch that tutorial after this one. You can find very useful information and techniques that I explained there. Okay, highlight and copy the name and then add a class to the current folder with that name ending in CS extension. Make the class partial. Move code from the category list.razor file to here. You see it's neat and clean and more readable. Next, let's create a method named load categories with the following signature. And copy this statement to the new method. Then we need to link the event callback parameter in the grid to this method. So modify the grid tag as follows. We can make another improvement to code. Go back to the category list class and get rid of this piece of code here, because we are going to do it differently. Go to the grid class and instead modify the uninitialized method this way. So according to the new approach, when the grid gets initialized, it calls the callback method, which is defined in the consumer component, to load data. And I like this approach much better. Alright, we are almost halfway there. Let's see how to go about the other half. Go back to the category list class and take another look at the load categories method. As you can see, it sends a GET request to the REST API with this relative address. So it maps to the get categories action method of the categories controller. Go to the REST API project and open the categories controller. Find the get categories method. This method returns all categories from the database, whereas now we want to get only those categories for a particular page. So we need to create a new action method with pagination information as its parameter to fulfill our request. You know that we've already created a class called GridInfo in the Northwind UI Components project that contains such information. So basically we can use it as a parameter type to such a method. But this requires us to add a reference to the RCL project in the REST API service, which is not desirable. Why? Because like I said at the beginning of this tutorial, the components maintained in the RCL project should be completely separate from other projects and have minimal dependencies on them and vice versa. These components only need to communicate with the presentation layer through UI properties and events. For this reason, RCL project components should not be shared with other projects except for the user interface services, and other projects should not be shared with the RCL project either. So let's create a new class library to contain such data structures and share it among the projects that need it. Give it a name of northwind.infrastructure. Rename class 1 to GridInfo and then move the GridInfo class from the RCL to this newly created project. Now we have to add a reference to this new library for each project that is using the GridInfo class. Currently, it's only Northwind UI components. The Northwind web project is using it indirectly through the RCL. So I'd also like to choose a better name for this class, like data source parameter or data source request. I'll pick the first one, so go back to the Northwind infrastructure project and rename grid info to data source parameter. Thanks to Visual Studio, it'll do the rest everywhere across the whole solution. If you want, you can change the variable names declared of this type. I'll leave it to you. Okay, we also need another class to keep the information about the result that the REST API returns. This consists of the total number of items that met the search criteria along with a subset of items in the given page. So let's create a new class and call it data source result. Note that we've defined it generic because it needs to hold a collection of entities of any type, like category or product. Now go to the Northwind service project and add a reference to the Northwind infrastructure project. Open the iEntity service interface and make the following changes to it. First, for both getAllAsync and getByParamAsync methods, change the return type from task IEnumerable tentity to task data source result tentity. Second, for the getByParamAsync method, uncomment its parameter. Afterwards, go to the entity service class and correct the return type of the getAllAsync method and modify code in the body as follows. It's time to implement the getByParamAsync method. It's similar to the getAllAsync method except that we need to apply paging parameters to it. So, first change its return type. Second, add a parameter of type data source parameter as we saw in the interface. Third, borrow the code from getAllAsync and make the necessary changes to fit this method. As you see, we calculate the count before applying paging because otherwise it will return at most the page size value as count, which is not correct. There are 2 points in this code. First, we haven't checked the paging parameter's value. For example, we assume that the page value is always a positive integer and valid. Second, we queried the database twice, once to get the record count and another time to get the list of items. We could write code to query database once and get both in one go, but I didn't want to make it complicated. Alright, now we can go to the REST API and write a new action method to get categories in a particular page. Open the categories controller and correct the return type of the getCategories method. Then create a new action method by duplicating it. And making the required changes to it as follows. First, add a parameter of type dataSource parameter to the new method. Second, call getByParameasync from the service in the body and pass it the parameter. Now we need to make some more changes to this method, as I'll be trying to explain in the next few minutes. First, keep in mind that we should not send payload in a GET request because it may cause some existing implementations to reject the request. Although it's not prohibited by the HTTP specification, the semantics are undefined. For this reason, we have to change it to be a POST method because POST requests allow payload or data in the request body. Second, we cannot have two POST methods in a controller with the same root template. The second version of the getCategories method and the createCategory method are now both POST handlers and have the same root template, and they will conflict. So we have to change the root template for this action method. Finally, because it's now a POST method, I prefer to not use the word get at the beginning of the method name. If you omit the request type attribute from an action method, by convention it will be considered a get method if the name starts by the get word. Because of this, I won't use get at the beginning of it, and I'll use read instead to remind us of read action in CRUD. So, by the way, before getting too late, let's also modify the return type of the getOrderDetails method in the OrderDetails controller. If you want, you can add a similar readOrderDetails method in this controller, like what we did in the categories controller. I'll leave it to you. Now we are ready to apply all the required changes to the presentation layer accordingly. Go to the grid.razor class in the Northwind UI Components project and make the following modifications. Change the type of items property from iListTitem to DataSourceResultTitem. Then rename it to DataSource. We also need to make a correction in the grid markup, so now open the category list class. Make the following changes in code in this class. First, change the type of the categories field. Second, rename it to _data source. Third, modify the code as follows. So from the code you can see that we have changed the old GET request to a new POST request with parameter as payload, and after acquiring the response we unpack the result from the content and assign it to the _data source. Now go to the category list markup and make a little correction there. Let's run the app and see what the result would be. Okay, there's a problem there. To find out more about that, open the developer tools on the browser by pressing the Ctrl Shift and I keys. Click on the console button to see the list of errors. And here you'll find the error details. As the message implies, the request has been blocked by course policy because the content type in the request header is not allowed. To fix this, we need to modify our course policy, which has already defined in the REST API, and I discussed it in detail in the Consume REST API from Blazor WebAssembly tutorial. So go to the startup class in the REST API and in the configure services method, add the following statements to the policy. You see that we also added allow any method to allow put and delete requests as well. You can even allow any headers and so on, and I'll leave it to you to investigate more for that. Alright, let's run the app for the last time and see it in action. It's awesome and works perfectly. That's all for now. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have any questions regarding the content of the videos, I'd be happy to discuss them with you in the comment sections. If you like this video, please do not forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.